So here's what we're going to talk about today. This is going to go in some interesting directions that I think will actually be really relevant to a lot of the talks that happen today. You might think when you see some of the stuff I talk about that like I snuck in over lunch and put some relevant things in, but trust me, it was all in there beforehand. So this is a guy named Ray Kurzweil, who I was actually with last week, and I did a talk yesterday at Singularity University just down the street. He's a real futurist. If you read his work, he's quite prolific, and he does some really interesting things. I'm kind of a futurist in training, right? But he's the real deal. And this is one of the things he said. We're going to be a hybrid. And my point of making you swap your phones is I wanted you to feel what that's like, that we're proving that out today. Now here's a quick example. Try and think the last time you went anywhere in a car without popping up your navigation, even places you know how to get to, right? Because you want to see what your robot is going to do for you. They're going to tell you which way do you go, how do you get there, right?
You may ask yourself, well, how did I get here?
Right?
Letting the days go by.
So you have given up some of your mental control to your robot. Here's another example. This kind of looks like a surly crowd to me a little bit. Imagine that one of us, or more of us, Dan, I'll maybe look at you, because he's a friend of mine. Imagine that you and I ended up in prison tonight for some crazy reason. We went on a bender, right? And they took your robot away, your smartphone. Who would you call, right? If you didn't have it. You maybe could remember your parents' phone number when you grew up, maybe your significant other, but beyond that, you don't know anybody's phone number anymore. You just know that it's in the thing, so it would make you feel a little stressful, right? You give up control. And there's an interesting point when we start talking about entertainment and the future and where this is all going as to why this is so relevant. You may be saying, this guy's nuts. Why would he be talking about this stuff? Well, there's kind of a method to my madness here. So here's part of the method to that madness. This is from a quote from a famous movie cowboy, and also a very famous innovator. If you do a little research, he was also the mayor of Beverly Hills, believe it or not, a long time ago. Do a little research on Will Rogers. You'll see he was way more than a movie cowboy. He said this: even if you're on the right track, and I presume a lot of you are on the right track because you came to this conference and that was a smart idea, you will get run over if you just sit there. If you're still thinking you're on the right trajectory, you know how to make entertainment, but if you don't learn how to experiment and you don't learn how to take risks and feel what it feels like to be on the edge, this young lady said it, summed it up. She said something to the effect of, yeah, I don't have cable. I don't even know what cable is, right? If you don't grasp that, fundamentally, you will get run over. So it's something to think about as we move through the day here for the next little bit. Here's some other statistics really quickly. 4 out of 5 smartphone users, that's all of you, say you check it within 15 minutes of waking up. This is the statistics back from 2013. We're now 4.5 years later. I would say it's within the first minute of waking up now, right? Anybody disagree? So happy, unhappy, more unhappy about that, right? 80% back in 2013 said it's the first thing they do in the morning. I would say it's 98% now, probably. Almost 80% have them all but 2 hours of their waking day. My postulation in 2017, it's all of about 11 minutes. It's when you're in the shower. That's the only time you don't have your robot with you. So just kind of try and grasp that as you don't have your robots with you right now, as someone else has your robots. Don't worry, you'll get them back. Maybe. Here's a little experiment. It's kind of fun to watch.
If you're going to be texting and walking, I'm a seeing eye person, I can help you walk and text.
Excuse me, I see you're texting. I can clear a path for you.
If you'd like to walk and text, we're here for you. Excuse me, sir. If you're going to be texting and walking, did you grab both? Good. So you're barely paying attention.
Excuse me, pardon me, texter walking. Texter coming through.
Okay, so I'm bringing up these statistics that's going by. Now, what is kind of fascinating, and where we're going to go with this talk in the next few minutes, is essentially with these little pieces of glass, we're kind of trying to wear them all day long, right? We're holding them at 20 degrees down, and we're running into things. There are terrible things that happen. You hear once every couple weeks someone falls off a cliff, gets hit by a car, bad things happen, because we're trying to wear the damn thing all day long, right? It's not designed to wear it yet, but it's getting there, right? These statistics are really interesting. I'll let you read some of those. This one's kind of interesting, right? Try and think the last time you went a full 24 hours without looking at it. Can you even remember? Probably not. Here's the last one that's really kind of fascinating. 1 in 3, they'd rather give up sex than give up their smartphones. That's a real study. Okay, all right. Now, these are some interesting statistics too. There's about 7.5 billion people on the planet, give or take. There are more mobile phone connections now than humans on the planet. That is something to think about. Half of them are smartphone connections, are robotic connections. There are 5 billion people, almost the entire population, getting there, today using mobile. By 2020, you're going to have almost the full population using robots. So kind of put that in your head as your robot is 5 inches away from you and you're feeling a little distressed about it. Now, I put these in because I think about this stuff a lot. And this is kind of what frames up my quote-unquote working day. I don't have anything even close to what I would call a real job. But this is the closest it gets to. I do a lot of these kind of talks, and people like to have me around because it's a little different than everybody else's talk. But all I think about is that what we do as humans is we like to do the same 6 or 7 things. And we like to evolve the technology that relates to those 6 or 7 things. We like to write, we like to read, we like to listen to things, but we make our tools better, and we make them more portable and more nimble, right? So that smartphone that you don't have right now is extremely nimble, and it can do all of these things. The Walkman, the Sony Walkman was a really interesting thing as we kind of move through this talk. Because the Sony Walkman was culturally relevant, and it was a massive hit, and it made audio, personal audio, nimble and correct. And when Steve found that little group doing this thing that he eventually called the iPod, that was the evolution of that. And the smartphone is the evolution of that. So things keep evolving. Here's some other examples of that, right? You can pretty much read every magazine you want on the iPads and your laptops and your mobile phones. You know what happened to the print newspaper industry. You know that you can essentially get every piece of information you want on that little robot when you want it. That's the power of the device connected to the world around you, right? You know what happened to the post office, it virtualized. You know what happened to shopping, it virtualized. And you know what happened to entertainment, it evolved, right? So these are interesting things to think about. This is another interesting thing to think about, and I like these a lot. As technology moves through its curve, what happened is we started pretty big, and then we got really small, and then we started to curve up again because people wanted more and more screen real estate. So the industries that got involved in figuring all this out figured out how to make the electronics really, really small and nimble and make the screen plane as big as possible, right? So the question is, where do we go from here? I just want you to, as we kind of move through these next little sort of images, just think about that curve and where we're kind of ending up by the thing is pretty much as big as we could possibly fit it into our pocket now, right? But it's all screen real estate. Now, what was interesting, and this was really interesting, when Don was talking today, when Sam Raimi was talking today, I was thinking about this and how relevant this is. When you heard Sam, I presume everybody was in here for Sam's talk. When he talked about his first movie, Evil Dead, and they said, were you thinking you were going to be something someday, you were going to be a big director? He's like, hell no. I was just like this kid trying to figure out how to get through the day and trying to make a movie that would play in the drive-in. He wasn't thinking he was going to be a business. He was thinking he was going to be a hobby, right? So my postulation is that the most influential companies of our time, all within about a 25-mile radius of here, and many within a 3-mile radius of here, which is really interesting that I'm on this stage today, all started out as hobbies in garages. None of these folks thought they were going to be something huge someday. They all just wanted to solve a problem. They all just had an instinct that they wanted to build something cool. And I think that has been very resonant throughout the day, and I think it's something to reflect on. This is a funny little moment, which if you like this show, you'll like this moment a lot. So I like this a lot. So it's worth taking a little break to watch this for a second. Audio.
Birthplace of Hooli. Peter Gregory's mother's garage. That was Peter's workstation. This was mine. Things sure have changed. But in a way, they've stayed exactly the same. As we forge our new path together, we must remain focused on what's really important. Not material success or wealth, but this, the spirit of innovation. A few coders, some ramen, and a dream. And that is why I brought you here. All right, let me show you the rest of the place.
Oh. You got a garage inside your garage. Impressive.
So it's one of my favorite shows. It's a drama, but for me, it's a documentary. It's literally, you're in the epicenter of this right here, right on Sand Hill Road. This is where all this stuff got created. The point of me showing you this is that the spirit of innovation is not the spirit of the trappings. You get the trappings if you get it right. But the spirit of innovation is the ramen and in the garage, and that's actually really real. So Mike Judge is a genius, the guy who created this stuff. He's also the guy behind Beavis and Butthead, which is one of my favorite shows of all time. Now, later, when we're having cocktails or something, I'll tell you a story about the show, and apparently one of the things I did as a stunt was an inspiration, if you watch the show, for something that happened later on in the show. I got it confirmed from a couple of people now, which is fascinating. But I'm not going to waste your time about it now. I'll just give you something to think about later if you want to learn about it. Okay. So, a little background. People are like, well, this is interesting. The guy seems a little odd. He seems a little over-energetic. He's very excitable. And he's very different than anybody else that's speaking today. So that's what I get to do. I get to be a futurist, right? And people are asking, like, what gives you the right to do that? How come you don't, how come you get up here and, and I'm not up here, right? So I actually had to think about this. People ask this question a lot. And one time it got asked in a big conference. I was talking like 5,000 people, and that was the question. And I had to think about it on stage, and I kind of came up in my mind with what I think it was. So this is what it was. So I grew up here in this state, this lovely state of Florida. I actually grew up specifically here in what I call the funnel of crazy. So Florida, in my mind, when you ever watch a news story and the story starts, and in this little interesting nugget, you're like, I know where this is going. Like, it's going to be from Florida. Like, the entire United States and Canada has a bunch of crazy up there all spread out, and when it starts to distill down, it all gets down to Florida for when the story happens, right? So when I was a little kid, we moved there in the late 60s, early 70s. So I grew up in this craziness. This was my world. I was this little Jewish kid from Brooklyn, and I got dropped into this world that was essentially orange groves, racist, pretty backwoods, pretty scary for a little kid like me. That was year one. Year 1.5, my world turned into this. So I literally grew up inside a theme park. And everything about my world at a very young age was getting comfortable with change. I did all kinds of work with these folks, as well as Nickelodeon and Universal and all these things. And I got really interested and excited about fantasy becoming reality, and how often they thought about change, and how nimble they were about change, and how they weren't afraid to try new things. So I got personally really comfortable with things being in a constant state of flux and a constant state of change rather than staying in the same place. And so it kind of makes sense that me as a kind of mid-50s guy now is still the 16-year-old kid that grew up in a theme park and never left. So I did production for a long time. I was a children's TV director, and then I got involved in all this crazy technology stuff as it related to storytelling. So I helped build all this stuff with Apple for 7 years that became the professional video side of Apple. And I got to live inside the Apple world just a stone's throw from here in Cupertino. Then I did a little startup that became something sort of big. And then I did a camera thing that became sort of big. And if you work in the movie business, you would know this camera. So I got sort of lucky to be a part of these teams that embrace change. And I was kind of the chief change maker. I was the guy that's like, I'm really comfortable pushing this big rock up this big hill. And I'm not afraid when everybody around me says I'm completely crazy and it's never going to happen. And then at some point when the rock starts to roll down the hill on its own, I'm like, I'm good, I'll start the next thing. And that's kind of what I did. So when I retired from the camera company, my friends at 20th Century Fox said, we want someone like you to help us figure out the future. I was like, what kind of job is that? And they said, well, essentially, cutting a long story very short, we need someone around that is looking out to make sure we don't wake up at a business one day. That the things that were staring us in the face, we were over here running our business, keeping the lights on, and we didn't actually realize what change was going to look like. So that's kind of what I get to do for a living. And just recently, I moved from Fox to Paramount, so now I do it at Paramount. All right, so that's just a little backstory. Hopefully that's not too long and boring. What a futurist really does, the stock and trade of a futurist is actually not that hard. All we do is we look at the past to see what's going to happen in the future. And that's just how it works. So a really good futurist is a pastist. Like I was sort of showing you all those slides of how things evolve and change, right? So look at these statistics. It's pretty interesting. In the 50s, some of you, no, you're all pretty too young to be born in the 50s. Some of you might remember this. In the 50s, there was roughly 10% of the households in the United States had a television. That's about 4 million households at the time. 10 years later, now I want you to think about that word 10 years later, because I'm going to reflect on it over and over and over again over the next 20 minutes or so, however long they let me talk here. This 10-year curve will come up over and over again. By 1975, everybody had a television. Try and think when you were in a house that didn't have a television. You probably can't remember. But there might be a future where in the future, you can see and imagine a living room where you won't need the physical embodiments of what we call a television anymore. We're evolving into something better, something more nimble, something more powerful. So I'm kind of getting to something here. So just something to think about. We also know that people really like screens. Let's see. Now's probably a good time you can swap your phones back if you guys want. Because now we're kind of getting to a point where it's like, all right, I want my phone. I want to maybe make some notes. I got to send a text. It's like I can't do it, right? How did everybody feel? It's kind of okay, right? You got a little break for a second? Weren't connected? Everybody relaxing a little better now? It's fine. You got your phones back. In 2016, Nielsen said that in the US, people devote 11 hours a day to screen time. I think it's way more than that. Try and think about your day, your average day. Little screen, medium-sized screen, big screen, very big screen, right? We also know that form and formulation change. And you notice there's a theme, right? I keep talking about formulation changing. We change the way that we do things. They get more powerful, and they become different. But we sort of do the same things on them. So the question is, we go from this to what's next, the big question mark, right? So we're going to get to that in a second. I just want you to think about this, because 1.5 generations ago, these are interesting statistics, but the one that's interesting to me, because as we start to talk about this thing called virtual reality, and you're wondering, is it going to take off? Is it going to mean anything? The first wave of what we call the connected world, CompuServe at its highest peak had about 3 million users, just 3 million. It still seems really important to us, CompuServe. It was only 3 million, right? Wave 2, the dynamics are a little different, right? Facebook has 2 billion users. Google has massive market cap, right? The iPhone, roughly 10 years ago, there's your curve, launched, sold 1 billion of these things. So now we're going from the small millions in the CompuServe, AOL-ish days to the billions in this wave 2. This was interesting because of what Steve was up here talking about, right? Here's the first YouTube video. Going to the zoo.
Cool thing about these guys is that they have really, really, really long trunks.
Elephants have long trunks. That's the first YouTube video. Now think about what YouTube is. And YouTube isn't even a teenager yet. It's kind of on that 10-year curve, right? It's 12 years old, give or take. So it lives in that 10-year bubble. And I don't need to, normally I spend like 5 minutes talking about this, but you got the real deal, like, an hour ago. So I don't even tell you anything about that. You get it, right? But it's a big agent of change in our world. So now we're getting to the point of like, okay, well, maybe he'll talk about VR at some point. So here's what I'm going to talk about. In my world, in my dynamic, I use these things all the time. Who uses these things now? Who wears them? Anybody get a chance to wear a VR headset? So even in this room, you guys are pretty forward-thinking people. Not everybody raised their hand. I do it every single day in some fashion. Who here watches TV every single day? Really? Not everybody? I think you're lying. You watch TV every single day in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it's on your phone. Maybe it's on your computer. TV in the broadest sense of the word, right? You watch media consumption on a screen. That's TV to me. Sorry, I'm in my 50s, can I tell you? So look at these numbers, right? 6 or so million headsets have been sold, 4.5 mobile, 1.8 million tethered. That doesn't include this Google Cardboard thing, which is 10 million on its own. That's kind of right under the threshold that I sort of look at. A little over 2 million the first 3 months of this year. So we're kind of in wave 1. Now, the reason why I brought that CompuServe AOL stuff up, I kind of feel like we're in this zone for VR. We're in wave 1. So when everybody's all nervous, is it going to take off? Is there going to be make any money? Does anybody care? Just think about wave 1 to wave 2. This is wave 1. Now, I refer to this, and you feel free to use this if you want, this terminology, as the BOF days. What's BOF? BOF stands for box on face. That's what VR is today. We take a box, we put some advanced technology in it. That's not a criticism of these devices at all, by the way. These things are remarkable. But it's still a big box on your face, right? So we've got to go somewhere from here. There's something that's going to come beyond the box on the face. And in a couple minutes, we're going to talk about maybe where that's going, unless they kick me off the stage. This is wave 1.1. So there was a big Oculus convention in San Jose, 10 miles from here last week. And they announced their next generation of stuff. This device that she's wearing is called Oculus Go. It will sell for under $200, completely self-contained. I believe this is going to be a big hit, and I believe we're going to start to move out of the small millions to the bigger millions now. We're probably going to crack the 10 million threshold. We're not going to be at the Google stage yet, but we're going to crack something. A year-ish, maybe a year and a half away, you're going to have a fully, completely mobile device that is just as powerful as the one that you connect to your PC today. And that's when we start to crack the code. But it's still a box on your face. So it's never going to be as big as anybody thinks while it still has this formulation. It's going to be an enthusiast product. We're going to sell a lot of them. There's going to be people making a lot of money, but not Google money yet. So just kind of keep that in mind as you sort of march through your technology curve. OK. Is this interesting so far? Everybody okay? OK. Just making sure, because I can talk about other stuff if you want. This is really interesting to me, and a really powerful point about the success of certain things. Who here, or your kids, or you know somebody, had or used something called a Nintendo Wii? Anybody here? A lot of people. Look at that. That's a lot of hands, right? This, in my opinion, was the first mainstream, widely adopted virtual reality system. Now, you didn't wear it on a headset. It wasn't fully immersive yet, but because you were looking on a traditional television screen, but it was very different than all the gaming that came before it, because this is what I call spatial entertainment. And there's a big point about the difference between something that's immersive. We can immerse ourselves in a movie screen, but something spatial, where you're actually using your physicality and your body to mimic what you would do in the real world. So when you played a Wii game, and you can see by these pictures, you could play tennis in your living room. You virtualized the entertainment. Note that word virtual, right? You could let grandma bowl in the living room, because she couldn't get out of the house anymore. But she could bowl. You gave her something that looked like this. And there were even stories, a lot of them, before they figured out they'd be able to put a little hand strap on those things, where people would get so into these things that they'd be using that little totem, and it would fly out of their hands because they were so into it, and they'd break their television. And that didn't just happen once or twice. It happened a lot. And there were lawsuits, and eventually they were like, you got to wear the little strap, right? That's our first foray. This was a wide-stream commercial success, and it's one of my key leading indicators that this thing we call virtual reality is going to matter, and it's time that you guys, if you're involved in it, should get involved in it now so you don't miss it. Remember, even if you're on the right track, right? You got to get into it. You got to figure it out. You got to put cycles in. These guys are going, yep, 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 because they do that for a living now. All right, so I think that's interesting. Where else does it live? Remember that theme park background I was talking to you about? Lo and behold, it popped right back into my world, right? Because theme park rides are essentially virtual reality experiences. We're taking you to a fantasy place. We're taking you to a historical place. We're taking you someplace else. And very often, modern theme park rides are gigantic simulations. We put you into a ride vehicle. We strap a visual all around you that's way more than a movie screen, and then we tie that physicality to your body. And that's what we call a ride. So this is my background, right? Which is really interesting. Now there's a new formulation of this kind of spatial entertainment. Remember, these are spatial. You go into a vehicle. You move around in space. You don't just watch it. It takes your physical body somewhere. That's what a theme park does. That was why Walt Disney was so genius, that he saw that he could build different forms of entertainment for different ways of thinking. Now, just to keep in mind, none of this is new. Everybody's like, oh, this whole VR thing's super new. No, it's not new at all. If you look at that magazine, VR goes mass market. That was 1995, right? So it didn't quite happen. You might ask why. And is that going to be the problem again? I don't think so. The problem it didn't go mass market wasn't because of enthusiasm, wasn't because of the interest in this. It was because the compute power to do this was so insanely expensive that you could not take it to a mass scale yet. And it essentially fell over. People wanted to do it. And it evolved into massive theme park rides that are hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars and make billions of dollars. So VR does exist today. It just doesn't exist at a wide spectrum yet on a headset, but it's coming. Here's what it's coming into. So this is an area we call LBE, stands for location-based entertainment. This is when more than just Disney or Universal or a few other big theme park operators can create theme parks, because the visualization part of it is getting very, very inexpensive. So a small operator can stand one of these up. And by the way, Disney's in the game too, because they're doing something with a big operator called The Void, and they're using VR technology outside of their theme park. It's not even in the theme park. It's literally parked on the side of their theme park, because they don't even need the theme park infrastructure to do it anymore, right? If some of you are savvy enough, you might see something from a long time ago called the Aladdin Magic Carpet Ride. Those are those two. Do you see that VR headset there? That thing was connected to 3 SGI Onyxes. And if you know what those are, that's $3 million of computer hardware for each VR headset. Today, we're a little less than $3 million for each VR headset. Headsets, give or take, the highest end tethered ones, all in, you're talking about $1,500. And now you're getting into just a few $100s for the mobile stuff, and eventually these things are going to cost and be very, very powerful for almost nothing, pennies, right? But this is kind of my world. I live in this world now because this is where we're going. This is very often people's first touch of virtual reality is this stuff. So there's lots of stuff out there. I like this because this is part of my theme park background, and hopefully you guys will get a little chuckle out of this. The reason why I love this so much is, do you remember when you went to a haunted house like in like your junior high school, and they put your hand in some grapes, and they said, they covered your eyes with a blindfold, and they put your hand in some grapes, and they're like, those are eyeballs. And as a 12-year-old kid, you're like, oh God, those are eyeballs, right? And then they put your hand on this thing, and they said, that's a brain. And you didn't know it was a cauliflower. You thought it was a brain because we took away your visual stimulation, and we just put a blindfold on you. We walked around a little maze. That is virtualized entertainment. Now imagine what you can do when you don't just have to blindfold somebody, but you can change out your visuals, right? What you're really seeing is not there. So this goes on steroids. I can make you believe that things are really happening when they're not really happening. And this was the beginnings of that. So all this stuff kind of keeps coming around. This is that pastist side of what I do. I just think that's fun. All right, so now I'm going to show you something from one of my favorite VR experiences. It's not from my studio. It's from Warner Brothers. But I love this. And this is just a question. It's just a little like 1-minute video of what the enthusiasm level and what virtualized entertainment feels like now. So we talked about the theme parks. This is what it feels like today a little bit. So watch this.
Awesome. When you're going down, it feels just like you're actually dropping levels. It is virtual reality.
As you put the mask on, the mirror appears, and you look into the mirror and you see in your own face it's Batman. So that's when you like really feel it.
I felt powerful, felt strong. It was cool to have like the belt on and to just like grab your stuff and throw it.
That was a lot of fun.
Closest thing that you could possibly get to being Batman.
Seeing like the I'm Batman, it's like, it's pretty cool.
It is beautiful. Oh man, the graphics on that, you are Batman.
You feel like you're transported someplace else. It was very cool.
It was intense, being able to do different things with his hands and take different gadgets.
Being able to look all around and use his gadgets, it really feels like you're Batman.
Absolutely incredible.
It was amazing.
It felt so real.
Awesome. Oh my God. Amazing. I want it.
This is the future.
Okay, so here's the good news, bad news. That's interesting, right? So essentially what I like to tell people is now we're at a stage where you get to wear a theme park on your face. And you can have it at home, and you can have it in your car, and you can have it on an airplane, and that's a power accelerator. I'm going to skip these, but these are games that you should learn about. They're really interesting. Super Hot, Job Simulator, Wilson's Heart, Resident Evil are all games in VR. I'm going to have to skip these really quick. Skip them.
Welcome to a world where mysteries.
Hello, human. Welcome to an actual simulation. So we can talk about this later, but this is virtualized entertainment. That's really starting to happen. This is something I did last year at Fox for The Martian. We made a VR experience for that, which is quite amazing. This piece in the lower corner there, I'm just going to skip
Mars has never been close to being
but you can learn, you can pop online and kind of get a sense of these things. This piece, Pearl, is something I would highly recommend you see in a VR headset. It's Pixar-level storytelling that is remarkable. And this thing called London Heist will scare the pants off you. It's ridiculous. So this is virtualized entertainment. It's really starting to happen. So just, you can find me after and I can tell you the links to these things. Okay, so this is the augmented world, right? You guys know that we're like layering things in from an augmented standpoint and moving things through, right? We're doing this all day long, right? So we're moving through this stuff pretty fast here. And then we're in this world, which is now taking virtual concepts and overlaying them in the real world. AR Core and AR Kit are a big deal, and you're going to have a billion addressable market in the fairly near term. So this is what your life's going to look like, or what your kid's life is looking like. These are all the things you can do. You can be inside worlds on your phone. But you're still in that restricted real estate, right? You're still in that restricted world of that little phone world. So here's where I can wrap up now. The question is there something beyond the box on the face, right? Is there something that gets more interesting, that gets more optical, that makes it feel like something you could take out in the real world? This is where I think, in my world of prediction, we get into this world. We get into that level, right, of these kind of billion addressable market successes. And I just wanted to show you one of them from my friend here, Matt. Are you in the room, Matt, somewhere? There he is. So this is one of them. So there's all kinds of things happening in this world. Some of these are still pretty expensive, pretty exotic. They're in the thousands of dollars. This one is really interesting because this one uses your iPhone. It snaps into here. You take these kind of walrus-like glasses. You put it in. So I'll sort of demonstrate what it feels like and looks like really quick here. You drop it in like that. You launch the app. I'm not going to do it right now, but I'll show you. And you do it, and you wear it. And now suddenly what happens is you're using your iPhone. This thing's like 150 bucks. And now you've spread that visual experience, right? So it's no longer restricted on this little piece like this. You're using the same piece, but you're expanding it, and you're removing the reticle. You're removing the border that allows you to then allow this world to start to become something really interesting. And that's where things, to me, get really, really interesting. So while I'm wearing this, it looks a little goofy, right? But it's super comfortable, and it's actually quite interesting, and I could wear this for a long time. So we're experimenting with this kind of stuff at the studio, and we see there's a big future for this kind of stuff. So I'll leave it there for now. There's a little more visuals that we could show about some things called Magic Leap and some other things that are happening, but that's a good sort of taste of where what a futurist gets to do. So thanks for listening.